The security monitor cast its glow across the mahogany desk like a pale eye watching, always watching. Salvatore Valenti sat perfectly still in his leather chair, his hands folded in front of him, each finger adorned with silver except for the bare one on his left ring finger, the one that had held a wedding band once, before she died, before everything became about building walls instead of homes. He was 47 years old but carried the weight of someone twice that age. His dark hair silvered at the temples. A scar ran from his right eye down to his cheekbone, a permanent reminder of the night his father was murdered, a permanent map of the moment he stopped being a boy and became something else entirely. The video played again. Same footage. Third time this week. Same woman in the black and white maid's uniform, hand scrubbing circles into his marble floors with the kind of focus that suggested she was scrubbing away something far deeper than dirt. Elena Morgan. 28 years old. Employed in his household for 14 months. Invisible, the way all good staff should be invisible. But tonight she was not invisible on the security camera. The timestamp read 11:03 p.m. She moved through the service entrance, her shoulders hunched as though the weight of the world had taken physical form and settled across her back. The November cold had turned her breath into small clouds of white vapor. She clutched something in her coat pocket so tightly her knuckles went bloodless. Salvatore had trained himself to read the smallest gestures, the minutest shifts in posture. Guilt looked exactly like what he saw on this screen. She stopped at the iron gate. Her fingers shook as they reached into her pocket and withdrew a piece of paper, crumpled, folded and refolded so many times the creases had worn white lines across its surface. Even from the grainy security footage, Salvatore could see the blood-red stamp, final notice. A debt letter. She stared at it under the streetlight, her face raised to the camera without knowing, and Salvatore saw something he had not expected to see. Not fear. Not the nervous energy of someone planning betrayal. Instead, he saw a woman looking at a sentence of execution and accepting it with the kind of quiet that only comes when you have run out of places left to run. She pulled out cash from her other pocket. $34. He knew the exact amount because he had watched her count it yesterday in the staff room when she thought no one was there. She had separated for $1 bills and set them aside, as if even those $4 belonged to something other than her. Then she had put the $30 back in her pocket and stared at the 4 bills for 3 full minutes before placing them in an envelope marked Ava's Fund in letters so small they were barely legible. A child's name. Salvatore knew from her employment file that she had a daughter. 7 years old. Hospital records showed the girl had congenital heart disease. He replayed the footage a 4th time. Elena stood at the gate, folded the debt letter with the same care someone might fold a loved one's burial shroud, tucked it against her ribs, and turned back to look at his mansion. For just 1 second, one single second, the camera caught her face in full light. And what Salvatore saw made something shift in his chest, something that had not shifted in 15 years, something that had been carefully calcified into ice and stone. She was not angry. She was not plotting. She was saying goodbye. The implications rolled through his mind like thunder. A woman at an iron gate, alone at night, holding the equivalent of 2 days' wages and a final notice. A woman looking at a mansion like it was a place she was leaving in order to disappear entirely. A woman who had a daughter with a heart condition. A woman whose mathematics did not add up to anything except one terrible conclusion. Salvatore reached for his phone. His fingers moved across the screen with the kind of automatic precision that came from thousands of decisions made under pressure. He typed out a message to Tony, his right-hand man, the lieutenant who had been with him since the beginning, since the blood on the floor, since the night everything changed. Bring her to the restaurant tomorrow night. 9 p.m. Private booth. Come alone. He hit send. The message disappeared into the digital void. Then he returned to the footage and watched Elena Morgan's face one more time. In his world, people who moved through shadows at night with hidden papers had only one purpose: betrayal. He had built his entire empire on that principle. He had survived by treating betrayal like a virus: isolate it, eliminate it, leave nothing behind but a warning. But what Salvatore Valenti did not know, what he could not possibly know as he sat in his penthouse office high above Philadelphia, was that this woman was not his enemy. She was not his betrayer. She was drowning, and the only person she was betraying was herself. He did not know that the debt letter in her pocket represented $65,000 that needed to materialize in exactly 3 days, or the surgery would be cancelled. He did not know that the $4 she had set aside for her daughter's fund represented 4 days of saving lunch money. He did not know that Elena Morgan had already visited every loan shark, every bank, every person who might have helped, and heard the same answer each time: "You have nothing. You own nothing. You are nothing." He did not know that she was planning to disappear that very night, to walk into the darkness with enough cash to buy her daughter one final meal, and then to simply stop existing, because stopping was easier than watching her child's heart fail. The monitor went dark. Salvatore sat alone in his office, the city lights of Philadelphia spread out beneath him like a million tiny fires. Somewhere in his mansion, Elena Morgan was finishing her shift, folding her uniform into the linen closet, preparing to slip out the service entrance one final time. The clock on the wall ticked forward. 11:44 p.m. She did not know he was watching. She did not know that tomorrow at 9 p.m. a private booth would be waiting. She did not know that the man she worked for, the man whose floors she had scrubbed into mirrors, the man whose marble halls she had made shine like ice, was about to discover the truth beneath her invisibility. But first, there was a story that needed to be told. A story that began not with a debt collector's letter, but with a mother counting pennies, and a daughter whose heart was breaking in ways that no surgery could completely repair. We need to go back. Back past the debt letter, back past the mansion, back to a small apartment on the north side of the city where Elena Morgan's day began not with hope but with mathematics, the kind of mathematics that only poor people ever truly understand, the kind that counted every single dollar, every single hour, every moment of breath left before the numbers ran out. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming tomorrow. Now, let us rewind to 3 weeks before Elena stood at that iron gate. Let us go back to the morning that changed everything. The sound of rain against a thin window cuts through the darkness. Not rain that sounds peaceful. Rain that sounds like 1,000 tiny accusations, tapping, tapping, tapping against the glass as if the sky itself was disappointed. The rain tapped against the thin window like tiny accusations, each drop a reminder that the sky itself was disappointed. Elena Morgan lay still in the darkness of her studio apartment, listening to that sound, knowing she had 14 days. 14 days until her daughter's heart stopped beating if the surgery did not happen. 14 days to find $65,000 that did not exist. She rose at 5 in the morning, her joints cracking like old wood. The bathroom mirror showed her a woman of 31 who looked closer to 50. Dark circles carved deep beneath her eyes. Her black hair, still thick, pulled back so tight it made her temples throb. She wore yesterday's clothes because today's clothes were in the laundry basket waiting for Sunday when she had 4 hours free between jobs. Elena opened the drawer beside her bed and counted the money again. She already knew the number. $34. $34.73 if you counted the change jar on the kitchen shelf. This was the sum total of her existence after paying the hospital bills, the rent that came due in 6 days, and the utility company's warning notice stamped in red letters across the envelope. She pulled out the debt collector's letter from beneath her pillow. The paper had creased so many times from her touching it that it was starting to tear along the folds. Final notice, the header screamed. Your account is 127 days past due. We will pursue legal action if payment of $22,400 is not received within 10 days. The letter smelled like cigarette smoke and despair, which was strange because she had never smoked and she kept the apartment obsessively clean. Her phone buzzed. A text from the hospital, Ava asking when Mommy was coming. She sent back a thumbs-up emoji because she did not have the words to type. The truth was that she was going to miss morning visitation again. The truth was that she had accepted a new job that started at 6 in the morning, and she could not be in 2 places at once, and the math of her life had stopped working months ago. The new job was at the Valenti mansion on the north side of Philadelphia. She had gotten it through a cleaning service that took 40% of her wages, which was robbery, but it was the only way to get hired when you were desperate and had no references beyond a decade of invisible labor. The iron gates of the estate stood 12 feet high, black and ornate, topped with spikes that caught the morning light like weapons. The driveway beyond was marble, pale and glittering, stretching toward a mansion that looked like a Roman temple had mated with a palace. White columns flanked the entrance. Windows reflected the October sky. 3 black SUVs sat parked in a circular drive, their windows tinted so dark you could not see inside them. A woman in her 60s, Mrs. Chen, the head housekeeper, met her at the service entrance. She was thin as a prayer, her grey hair pulled into a knot so severe it looked painful. She handed Elena a black dress, a white apron, and a white collar without smiling. "You will clean the east wing floors on your hands and knees," Mrs. Chen said. Her accent was Mandarin beneath careful English. "You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not look the staff in the eye. You do not speak to the family. You do not speak to the men in suits. You are invisible. Do you understand?" Elena nodded and changed into the uniform in a bathroom the size of her entire apartment. The dress hung on her frame. The apron tied tight across her ribs. The collar made her neck itch. When she looked in the mirror, she saw exactly what Mrs. Chen had meant. She looked like nothing. A woman made of fabric and invisible ink. The east wing floors were marble, stretching in long polished rivers beneath arched ceilings. Mrs. Chen handed her a bucket and a brush and left her alone. Elena knelt down on the cold stone and began to scrub in small circles, her knees aching within minutes, her hands already raw from the cleaning service jobs that filled her other hours. Around her, the mansion hummed with the sound of money. Distant voices echoed down hallways. A door opened somewhere far away. Footsteps approached, measured and unhurried, the sound of men in expensive shoes crossing expensive floors. She kept her eyes down. She did not look up even once, not even when the footsteps stopped somewhere near her, not even when she felt a presence like weight pressing down on the top of her head. The footsteps continued. The presence faded. She was invisible, and invisible was safe. That night she took the bus to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. The ride took 42 minutes. She counted them. The hospital corridors smelled like antiseptic and despair, a smell that never washed out of her clothes no matter how many times she laundered them. Ava's room was in the cardiac unit on the 4th floor, room 347, where the walls were painted a soft yellow that was meant to be cheerful but just looked sick. Her daughter lay in the hospital bed like a small ghost. 6 years old and already so familiar with needles and blood tests and the word that no child should ever know, surgery. And ran into the back of her tiny hand, taped down with white gauze. Her blonde hair, which had been thick and shiny a year ago before the diagnosis, had thinned to wisps. Her skin had taken on a translucent quality, as if she was already fading. "Mommy," Ava said, her voice thin as the hair on her head. "You came." Elena sat on the edge of the bed and took her daughter's free hand very carefully, as if holding something that might shatter. "Of course I came, baby. How is your heart feeling today?" "It hurts when I run," Ava said. "But I am not supposed to run anymore." Mrs. Chen said I am not supposed to do anything fun. She said rest is the only medicine. Mrs. Chen is not a doctor, Elena said quietly. "Are you going to be here when I sleep?" Elena's throat tightened. She had been late to visitation for 3 days in a row. Yesterday she had missed it entirely because the cleaning service had called with an emergency job. "Not tonight, sweetheart. But I will be back tomorrow." Ava nodded like she understood, like 6-year-olds understood anything about mothers who had to choose between being present and keeping the lights on. Elena stayed until visiting hours ended at 8 o'clock. "No," Elena whispered. "There is no one. We have a financial assistance program," Dr. Patel said, and he handed her a brochure that she already had 3 copies of at home. "Some patients qualify for charity care or payment plans." Elena took the brochure because she could not refuse it, but they both knew the truth. Charity care went to people with some hope in their future, some reason to believe they might recover financially. Elena was a 31-year-old maid with $34 and 14 days. She returned to the Valenti mansion at 10 o'clock that night. The service entrance was locked, but Mrs. Chen had given her a key. The hallways were dark except for soft security lights mounted in the corners. Her footsteps echoed as she made her way to the kitchen to begin her night shift, an additional 4 hours of work that Mrs. Chen had arranged, scrubbing and polishing anything that had been used during the day. It was during her 4th week at the mansion that everything changed. Elena was in the wine cellar at 2 in the morning, polishing silverware because Mrs. Chen had docked her pay for a microscopic streak on a mirror that she had missed on her second pass, and Elena needed to make up the money with extra hours that were not paid extra. The cellar was cool and damp, the kind of place where time moved differently, where 2 in the morning felt like it could be 2 in the afternoon or 2 in the morning in a century nobody had named yet. She heard shouting from deeper in the cellar, near the storage racks where the oldest wine was kept. A young man's voice, slurred and vicious. Then an older man's voice, frightened, protesting. Elena set down the silverware and moved toward the sound. What she saw was a young man in designer clothes, probably 24 years old, with the soft face of someone who had never been told no in his entire life. His name was Marcus Webb, though she did not know that yet. He was pressing an elderly groundskeeper named Mr. Ricky against the stone wall, his fist raised. "Give me the codes, old man," Marcus was saying, his breath smelling like expensive vodka and casual cruelty. "Give me the security codes to Salvatore's private office or I will break every bone in your hands. How will you garden then? How will you hold a shovel?" Mr. Ricky was shaking, his weathered face grey with fear. He was a man Elena had seen every morning sweeping the marble driveway, a man who had nodded to her once with the kindness of someone who understood invisibility. Elena did not think about what she was doing. She did not calculate the risk or consider the consequences. She simply stepped into the space between Marcus and Mr. Ricky and said in a clear voice, "Leave him alone." Marcus spun around, his eyes unfocusing and refocusing on her like she was a ghost he was trying to make solid. "Who the hell are you?" "I am no one," Elena said. "But Mr. Ricky is going to stay the way he is." "You are just a maid," Marcus said, his lip curling. "Get out of my way or I will break your fingers instead. Then we will see how much use you are to Salvatore." Elena did not move. She looked up at the security camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling, the one she had noticed on her first day. She met its lens like it was a person's eyes. Like there was someone watching from the other end. Then she looked back at Marcus and said, "I think you should leave now." Something in her voice, or her eyes, or the absolute stillness of her body, made Marcus hesitate. For just a moment so small you could have missed it, he looked uncertain. Then his face hardened into cruelty again. He grabbed Elena's wrist, twisting the small bones, and she felt pain shoot up her arm like lightning. "You just made a very big mistake," he said. But footsteps echoed down the stone hallway. Heavy footsteps. Deliberate footsteps. The kind of footsteps that meant authority was approaching. Marcus released her wrist and ran, disappearing through the service exit that led toward the back garden. Elena's arm throbbed where he had gripped her. 2 men appeared in the wine cellar. The first was Tony, one of Salvatore's lieutenants, a man in his 40s with a scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone. The second was Theo, younger, with shoulders that looked like they had been carved from stone. Neither of them acknowledged Elena. They helped Mr. Ricky to his feet and guided him toward the stairs. "Come on, old man," Tony said quietly. "Let us get you somewhere safe." Elena returned to polishing silverware, her hands shaking so badly that she dropped a fork 3 times before she managed to set it in the rack. Her heart was beating so fast she thought it might burst right through her ribs. She had stood up to someone dangerous. She had looked directly at a security camera. She had made herself visible for the first time since she had entered this mansion. Above her, in the penthouse office on the 14th floor, Salvatore Valenti sat at his desk with a whiskey glass frozen halfway to his lips. On his computer screen, the security footage from the wine cellar was playing. He had been watching the property feeds, as he did most nights, unable to sleep, unable to rest, his mind always calculating, always watching for threats. He had watched Marcus Webb enter the cellar. He had heard the threat to Mr. Ricky. And then a woman in a maid's uniform had stepped between them. A woman he barely remembered noticing, one of the invisible staff who moved through his mansion like ghosts. But she was not invisible in this moment. She was standing so still it looked like defiance. And then she had looked directly at the camera, directly at him, and for a moment it had felt like she could see through the lens all the way to his eyes. Salvatore replayed the footage 3 times. Each time, he stopped at the moment when Elena looked at the camera. Her chin was raised. Her eyes were steady. She was not afraid, and she was terrified, and she had stepped forward anyway. He had built an empire on reading people, on understanding when someone was weak and when someone was dangerous. This woman was not dangerous. But she had something else. Something that made him want to watch that footage a 4th time. He did not sleep that night. He watched the wine cellar recording until the sun came up over Philadelphia, and by the time the morning light hit the marble floors of his mansion, Salvatore Valenti had made a decision. The invisible maid was about to become visible to him. For 6 weeks after the wine cellar, Salvatore Valenti did not sleep. Not the way other men slept. He dozed at his desk with security feeds running on 3 monitors, his mind calculating threats in the darkness, his hand never far from the loaded pistol in his desk drawer. The penthouse office on the 14th floor became his cathedral, and the security cameras his confessors. On a Tuesday night at 11:07 p.m., he watched Elena exit through the servants' entrance. The timestamp glowed in the corner of his screen. She wore her thin coat despite the humid August air, clutching it closed around her body like it might fall apart if she let it go. Salvatore leaned forward. In 3 months of employing this woman, he had never seen her leave the mansion after dark. She walked for blocks through Philadelphia's South Side, past closed storefronts and flickering streetlights, to a 24-hour check-cashing place on Broad Street. Through the plate glass window, the camera showed her pulling something from her pocket. Salvatore zoomed in. $34. That was all she held. She stood under the fluorescent lights for 2 full minutes, staring at the cash like it might multiply if she concentrated hard enough. Then she tucked it back inside her coat and walked away without cashing anything. Salvatore replayed the footage. $34. A woman does not carry cash she refuses to use unless that cash is sacred. Unless it is all that stands between her and absolute nothing. He did not understand it yet. But he was beginning to feel something shift in his chest, like a blade turning slowly in old wounds. Thursday night brought clarity. Elena sat on the marble bench outside the mansion at midnight, the one beneath the magnolia tree that bloomed in spring. Her shoulders were curved inward like she was trying to make herself smaller, invisible. She pulled something from her coat pocket, a letter, crumpled, already soft from repeated folding and unfolding. Salvatore enhanced the image. Even through the grain of the security footage, he could read the header, Debt Collection Agency. Amount due. He could not quite make out the number. He zoomed again. $65,000. His blood turned to ice. The letter was stamped red, Final Notice. Elena sat there in the darkness with that letter in her shaking hands, reading words that were destroying her, and then she pressed her face into her palms. Her shoulders shook. She was crying silently, the kind of crying that makes no sound, the kind that comes from a place so deep it has exhausted its own voice. Salvatore stared at the screen until the image burned behind his eyes. Tony and Theo appeared in the office doorway an hour later, as they always did when Salvatore summoned them. Tony was 42 years old, built like a refrigerator, with scars across his knuckles from 15 years of violence. Theo was younger, maybe 35, with grey threading through his hair at the temples. Both men had been with Salvatore since he took over the Philadelphia territory. Both men would kill without hesitation if he asked them to. Salvatore did not look at them. He pointed at the paused image on the screen. Elena, frozen mid-cry, the final notice letter visible in her hands. That is serious money for a maid, Tony said quietly. Margaret Harrington was at the Philadelphia club last week, Theo added. His voice was flat, the voice of a man stating facts he does not want to state. She told the Inquirer reporter that she would destroy you by Christmas. That was her exact words. Destroy you. By Christmas. Salvatore's jaw tightened. Margaret Harrington. 52 years old, widow of Victor Harrington, mother of Marcus Webb. The woman who had publicly declared war on him in the society pages like they were rivals in some romantic novel instead of soldiers in an actual war. The woman whose son had been caught threatening his staff. The numbers aligned too perfectly. Elena needed $65,000. Margaret Harrington had that amount the way other people had loose change. Margaret Harrington had the connections to promise payment to an invisible maid if that maid provided access. Security codes. Schedules. The location of his properties. The names of his men. Keep watching her, Salvatore said. His voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. Sunday night at 11:43 p.m. brought proof. Elena met a man outside Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. The man wore a gray suit and carried a manila folder. The security camera that Salvatore had installed on the hospital's east wall 3 years ago, for reasons he could no longer remember, showed them clearly. Elena's face was desperate. The man's face was bureaucratic, sympathetic in the way of people who deal in bad news professionally. The man handed her papers. Elena shook her head violently, gestured with her hands, her mouth moving in words the microphone could not capture. The man placed a hand on her shoulder in what might have been comfort or might have been conclusion. He walked away. Elena sank onto the hospital steps. Her entire body curved inward. Her shoulders shook. Salvatore watched his enemy's insider contact fall apart on those cold concrete steps and felt absolutely nothing. Or perhaps he felt everything and had learned long ago how to make it look like nothing. He was 17 years old again, hiding in the coat closet of his father's office. His father's partner, a man his father had loved like a brother, had told Victor Harrington when Salvatore's father would be alone. His father had begged. Salvatore could still hear it, the particular tone of a man realizing that trust was a luxury he could not afford. 2 shots. Then silence. Then his father's blood spreading across the carpet like a map to hell. Salvatore learned that night that betrayal lived inside people like a disease. You could not cure it. You could only cut it out before it killed you. He picked up his phone. His fingers moved before his mind fully caught up. Tony, he said. Tomorrow night. Bring Elena Morgan to Giovanni's restaurant. 9 p.m. Private booth. Tell her it is mandatory. What are you going to do? Tony asked. Salvatore did not answer. Both men knew what mandatory meetings in private booths meant in their world. They meant endings. They meant the disposal of threats before threats could multiply. Salvatore ended the call and opened his desk drawer. He pulled out the security footage from the wine cellar incident 6 weeks ago. He had watched it so many times that he knew every frame. He watched it again now, frame by frame, until he reached the moment where Elena looked directly at the camera. Where she looked directly at him. Then he picked up the fallen letter that Tony had brought him an hour ago. The letter Elena had written on notebook paper, covering both sides in her small, careful handwriting. He read it slowly, word by word, and felt something in his chest break open like a dam that had held too long. Outside his office window, Philadelphia stretched out beneath him like something he had conquered and emptied. The city lights reflected off the Delaware River. Somewhere in that city, a woman was saying goodbye to her daughter. Somewhere in that city, a child was sleeping without knowing that her mother had already written the words that would explain her absence. Salvatore Valenti, who had built an empire on eliminating love before love could eliminate him, read Elena's confession of how she had loved him and knew that everything he had planned was about to change. Thunder rumbled over the city. The weather service had issued warnings. A summer storm was coming, the kind that split the sky open. Salvatore made a new phone call. Then another. Then a third. By the time Elena received the message telling her to be at Giovanni's by 9 o'clock, everything had already begun to shift. The moment she arrived at that restaurant with a farewell letter pressed against her ribs, believing she was walking toward her own ending, Salvatore Valenti would be waiting with the security footage of every threat, every manipulation, every lie that Margaret Harrington and Marcus Webb had constructed around her. He would show her the proof. He would show her that he knew the truth. And in that knowledge, something neither of them had prepared for would begin to grow, something that had been growing since the night Elena looked directly at the camera and met the gaze of the man watching from his penthouse office, the man who had learned too young that love was just another way to be destroyed, but who was about to learn something different entirely. The rain began to fall over Philadelphia. The storm was coming. And everything would change when Elena Morgan walked into that restaurant and sat across from the most dangerous man she had ever met, understanding for the first time that sometimes the person who could destroy you is exactly the person who will save you instead. 2 days after the restaurant, Elena stood in Ava's hospital room watching her daughter sleep. The morning light came through the windows soft and pale, and Elena's hand rested on the blanket covering Ava's small chest, feeling it rise and fall, rise and fall. The breathing was easier now. The surgery was done. The heart that had struggled for 6 years was beating strong. Elena picked up the hospital file from the bedside table. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The invoice page showed a number that had haunted her for months, $200,000. Below that number, in printed letters that seemed impossible, were the words "paid in full, anonymous donor." She had not seen Salvatore since that night in the restaurant when the rain fell like the sky was breaking open. Tony had driven her home through the storm in a black SUV, silent except for 5 words, "The boss says take the week off." Paid. Elena did not know if she still had a job. She did not know if the man who had saved her daughter's life intended to ever see her again. That evening, Elena stood outside the Valenti mansion. Another storm was moving in, lighter than the first but steady, cold rain soaking through her thin jacket. She needed to know. She needed answers even though she had no right to ask for them. She walked up the long driveway on foot, past the fountain that had never stopped running even when she could not afford to feed her own child. The men in suits stationed around the grounds watched her approach but did not stop her. They seemed to be waiting. Elena reached the service entrance where she had entered for 3 months, scrubbing floors on her hands and knees, invisible in her black and white uniform. She pulled her old key from her pocket and inserted it into the lock. Nothing happened. The mechanism did not turn. The system had been changed. She stood in the rain, water streaming down her face, and understood what this meant. He had cut her out. He had solved the problem, Ava's surgery paid, the debts erased, the threat eliminated, and then he had removed Elena from his world because that is what men like Salvatore Valenti do. They fix things. They move on. They do not keep broken people in their lives. Elena turned to leave, her heart breaking in a way that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the loss of something she had never actually possessed. A voice stopped her. "Where are you going?" She turned. Salvatore stood in the rain without an umbrella, his suit jacket dark with water, his dark hair dripping, his eyes burning like a storm gathering behind glass. He wore a cashmere coat worth more than a year of her old rent, and it was soaked through like he had been standing there waiting for a long time. Elena could not speak. Salvatore walked toward her, stopping 1 foot away. "Your key does not work because you do not work here anymore." His voice was deep and solid like an oath, each word measured and final. Elena's breath caught. She turned her face away. "Elena." He said her name like a knife cutting through air. "Look at me." She looked. "You do not clean my floors anymore. You do not scrub marble on your hands and knees. You do not disappear into corners and count your hands until they bleed. Do you understand what I am saying?" Elena shook her head, confused. Salvatore reached into his coat and withdrew a folded letter. Even soaked with rain, Elena recognized it. Her confession. The word she had written sitting on the hospital waiting room floor, the letter she had meant to leave behind like a farewell to a life that was ending. "I found this," Salvatore said quietly, "in your jacket pocket the night you thought you would end yourself to protect me. I read every word, Elena. Every single word." He opened the letter carefully, the paper fragile with water. He did not read aloud. He simply held it so she could see her own handwriting, and his eyes tracked down the page to the place where she had written, "I have loved you since that night, though you never looked at me, though you never will." "You were wrong," he said. His voice broke slightly on the last word. "About the part where you thought a man like me could never love a woman like you. You were wrong about that." Headlights flooded the driveway. 3 black SUVs screeched to a stop at the mansion entrance, their tires throwing water in all directions. 12 men in tactical gear poured out like they had been waiting for a signal. Tony led them, his jaw set hard, his eyes colder than the rain. They dragged Marcus Webb from the middle vehicle. He was handcuffed, his designer clothes torn, his face bruised, his eyes wide with the terror of a man who had finally understood that nothing would save him. They forced him to his knees in the rain directly in front of Salvatore and Elena. Marcus stammered, "Please, I did not mean, I was just, my mother made me." Salvatore crouched down to his eye level, his voice colder than anything Elena had ever heard. "You threatened to break her fingers. You took photographs of a 6-year-old child in a hospital bed. You thought being Victor Harrington's nephew made you untouchable in this city." Marcus trembled like a wounded animal. "I will leave Philadelphia. I will never come back." "I will." Salvatore stood. "You are not leaving." 2 police cars pulled up behind the SUVs, their lights flashing red and blue in the darkness. 2 federal agents in FBI windbreakers stepped out. Salvatore nodded to Tony, who handed them a thick folder. The lead agent opened it, pages of documents, photographs, bank statements, and his eyebrows rose as he read. "Wire fraud," the agent said. "Extortion. Threatening a witness. Intimidation of a minor." He looked at Marcus Webb like looking at something that had already been discarded. "You have the right to remain silent." Marcus screamed as they forced him into the police car. "You cannot do this. I am a Webb. My mother will." The car door slammed. Salvatore watched him go without expression. "Your mother is already destroyed." For hours later, the television broadcast showed what was left of Margaret Harrington's life. The evening news anchor, a woman in a blue suit, looked directly at the camera. "Breaking news tonight. Prominent socialite Margaret Harrington has been arrested by federal authorities." The footage cut to Margaret being led from her mainline mansion in handcuffs, wearing only a white robe, her blonde hair disheveled, her face red with rage and humiliation. Reporters swarmed her, cameras flashing like lightning. She screamed, "I did nothing wrong." The anchor's voice continued over the images. "Evidence shows Mrs. Harrington threatened families whose children required medical care, coercing them into criminal activity. She faces 40 years in federal prison." A recording played. Margaret's voice threatening Elena outside the hospital, "Your daughter will die unless you do exactly what I say." Back at the mansion, Elena watched this on Tony's phone. Her hand covered her mouth. Salvatore said quietly, "They wanted to use your daughter as a weapon. So I used the law as mine. Justice does not always require death, Elena. Sometimes it requires making someone lose everything while they are still alive to suffer it." The rain slowed. Salvatore's men withdrew to their vehicles, giving them space. Salvatore still held Elena's letter. "You wrote that you loved me before I learned to love you back," he said. His voice was unsteady. "You were wrong about that too." He stepped closer. "I have been watching you for 3 months. I have seen you count $34 like it was a fortune. I have seen you stand between danger and an innocent child. I have seen you refuse help that could have saved your daughter because you would not betray someone who never even looked at you." He took her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite his power. "I learned to love you the night you looked at the security camera. You looked at me like you saw something worth protecting. Like I was more than the empire I built on my father's blood. Thunder rumbled in the distance, the storm moving away. I am just a maid, Elena whispered. I have nothing to offer you. You have offered me everything that matters, Salvatore said. You have shown me that courage is not about power. That some people are worth breaking every rule you ever made. He kissed her forehead, and in that gesture was a gentleness the world had never seen him give. What nobody knew was that this moment was not an ending. It was a beginning. And the security cameras kept recording, capturing the first time in 15 years that Salvatore Valenti held someone like she was the only thing keeping him alive. Because sometimes, one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. 1 week later, the afternoon sun poured through the windows of Children's Hospital of Philadelphia like liquid gold, and Elena Morgan stood in the doorway of room 317, watching her daughter breathe without struggle for the first time in her daughter's entire life. Ava sat up in the hospital bed, her small blonde head propped against pillows, her cheeks pink instead of the gray they had been for months. The new heart valve, the one that cost $200,000, the one that Salvatore had made possible without a single word of explanation, was beating steadily inside her small chest. A perfect rhythm. A future. Dr. Patel, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and steady hands, placed one final stethoscope listening against Ava's chest. Perfect, she said, and she looked at Elena with a smile that meant everything. Her recovery is ahead of schedule. The valve is functioning beautifully. She will live a completely normal life, Elena. Completely normal. You can take her home tomorrow morning. Elena nodded, but her body did not move. She stood frozen in the doorway as if movement might shatter this moment into something untrue. 6 months ago, she had been counting $34 in an apartment with black mold creeping up the bathroom walls. 6 months ago, Ava had asked her why her heart sounded like a broken drum. 6 months ago, Elena had written a goodbye letter she never intended to send. Ava reached out her small hand toward her mother. Mama, come sit with me. Elena moved toward the bed like someone walking through water. She took her daughter's hand, small and warm and alive, and she broke. Not gently. Not quietly. She folded forward and let 8 years of terror and sacrifice and sleepless nights pour out of her in sounds that did not quite sound human. Ava wrapped her small arms around her mother's neck and did not ask questions. She had learned that some kinds of crying were not sad. Some kinds were relief. They sat like that for 20 minutes, hospital sounds moving around them, machines beeping, nurses walking past, the distant ring of a telephone, and Elena's tears soaked into her daughter's blonde hair. At 3 o'clock, the nurses came to discharge paperwork. At 3:30, a black SUV pulled up to the hospital's main entrance, and Salvatore Valenti stepped out onto the concrete, but Elena did not recognize him at first. He wore dark jeans and a gray cashmere sweater, the kind that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His dark hair was not slicked back in the way she had only ever seen it. He looked younger. Softer. He looked, she realized with a jolt that went through her chest like an electric current, like a man instead of an empire. Tony and Theo remained in the front seats of the SUV, their eyes tracking his movements with confusion. Neither lieutenant had ever seen Salvatore Valenti dressed in anything other than tailored suits that cost $3,000. Neither had ever seen him wait at a hospital entrance at 3:30 on a Tuesday afternoon. Elena pushed Ava's wheelchair through the glass doors, and Salvatore moved toward them, his expression shifting when his eyes landed on Ava's face, on the pink in her cheeks, on the small smile that had finally returned to her mouth. He crouched down to the 6-year-old's level, his tailored jeans pulling at the fabric, the movement casual but deliberate. "Hello, Ava," he said. His voice was gentle. "I am Salvatore. I am a friend of your mother's." Ava studied him with a serious, assessing gaze of a child who had spent 6 months in hospitals learning to read the truth in adults' faces. "My mama says you are the reason I got my new heart," Ava said. Her voice was small but clear. "Thank you." Salvatore's jaw tightened slightly. He was not used to gratitude. He was used to fear, loyalty, respect born from power. He was not used to a 6-year-old girl looking at him like he was a good person. "You are welcome," he said. His hand hovered over Ava's blonde hair but did not touch. "You have a very brave mother." "I know," Ava said without hesitation. "She is the bravest person in the whole world." Salvatore looked up at Elena, and in his eyes was something she had not seen before, something that looked like pride, like wonder, like the expression of a man seeing proof that he had done something right. "She is," he said. The drive across Philadelphia took 20 minutes, and neither Elena nor Salvatore spoke. Ava sat between them in the back seat, her hand in Elena's hand, her eyes tracking the familiar city streets as they moved from the hospital district toward a neighborhood Elena did not recognize. They turned onto a tree-lined street where Victorian brownstones stood in neat rows, their windows gleaming, their stoops freshly swept. Salvatore pulled the SUV to a stop in front of a building with pale blue trim and window boxes overflowing with autumn flowers, chrysanthemums and ornamental kale in colors that seemed impossible. "This is not the mansion," Elena said. "Not a question. An observation. A fear." "No," Salvatore agreed. He stepped out and opened Ava's door, then Elena's. "It is not." He unlocked the front door, and Elena stepped inside a world that did not belong to her. 3 bedrooms, hardwood floors that reflected the afternoon light, furniture already placed, a cream sofa, a glass dining table, bookshelves along one wall. Sunlight poured through clean windows. The space smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. Ava ran through the room squealing with delight, her footsteps echoing. "Mama, Mama, there is a room with a window seat." "Mama." Elena stood in the doorway and did not move. "You cannot go back to that one-room apartment with mold in the bathroom," Salvatore said. His voice carried no judgment, only fact. "Ava needs space to heal. This place is yours. Rent paid for 2 years. Utilities included. Everything." Elena turned to him, and tears started again, but different tears, confused tears, overwhelmed tears, tears that did not understand mercy. "I cannot." Salvatore stepped forward and gently covered her mouth with one large hand. His touch was careful. His eyes held something that looked almost like tenderness. "Stop saying you cannot accept things," he said. "Start saying thank you." Elena took his hand from her mouth and held it, pressing his palm against her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. "But also, why are you doing all of this?" Salvatore looked at her like the answer should be obvious, written across his face. "Because when I watched my father die, I made a promise that I would build something powerful enough that nobody could ever take anything from me again," he said. His voice was quiet, the quietest she had heard it. "I built the empire. I built the walls. I built the rules. And then you walked into my world with nothing but courage and you broke every single wall I built. You made me feel human again, Elena. So yes, I am giving you a home. I am giving you safety. I am giving you everything I can because you gave me something I did not know I had lost." He pulled her close, and she could feel his heartbeat against her temple, steady and strong. "You gave me back the ability to love someone." That evening, Salvatore stayed for dinner, take out Chinese food on paper plates because the kitchen did not yet have dishes. Ava talked without stopping, describing the hospital and her favorite nurse and the day Dr. Patel told her the surgery worked. Salvatore listened like every word mattered. Like this small girl's voice was more important than any business that required his attention. After Ava fell asleep in her new bedroom, Elena and Salvatore sat on the front steps watching Philadelphia's streetlights flicker on, one by one, a constellation of light emerging from dusk. "What happens now?" Elena asked. Salvatore took her hand. His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Now you decide. You can have this life, safe, provided for, free from the mansion and the world I live in. I will never ask you for anything in return." Or, he paused, and his eyes found hers in the gathering darkness. "Or you can let me be part of your life. Really part of it. Not as the man who saved your daughter but as the man who loves you." He stopped, letting silence sit between them like a held breath. I know what I am, Elena. I know the world I come from. I will understand if you want distance. Elena turned to face him fully, and she took his face in her hands. I wrote you that letter because I thought I would never see you again, she said. I told you I loved you because I thought I had nothing left to lose. I meant every word. And I do not want distance. Salvatore kissed her then, soft and careful, like she was something precious he was afraid to break. When they pulled apart, he said, I watched you on those security cameras thinking you were my enemy. Turns out you were my salvation. Elena smiled, the first real smile in months. I watched you thinking you could never see me. Turns out you were looking the whole time. They sat on those steps until midnight, talking about Ava's future, about Salvatore's plans to expand into legitimate business, about what it means to build something good from broken pieces. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed past. Rain began to fall, soft and warm. Salvatore pulled Elena close and did not let go. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, like and share this video with the people you love. Every comment you leave is a precious source of motivation. We wish all of you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace.